Hi everyone. Welcome to Tell Me Another Storytelling for Parents and Grandparents with Priscilla Howe. Before we get started, just remember that you can still register for our summer reading program and win prizes. Registration is open till August 15th. That's when we'll be pulling the prizes. To register, you can go online at rollapubliclibrary.beanstack.org, download the um, Beanstack Tracker app, or come in and we can help you register you in the library. So I will stop talking and we'll get started with Tell Me Another with Priscilla. So I'll let her take over.
All right, thank you so much. It's nice to be here, and this is my second program for Rolla Public Library. I'm glad to be back. We've got a couple more coming up later. Um, and so I am Priscilla Howe. I'm a storyteller. I've been a full-time storyteller since 1993 after 5 years as a children's librarian and storyteller in my job. But really, I started telling stories when I was about 13 or younger, maybe. But when I was 13, I babysat and I made up stories and I told these stories to kids. Um, so I've been a storyteller for a very long time, and I love encouraging parents and grandparents and storytellers and librarians to tell stories. I am not a parent, so let me give that little caveat. I am not a parent, I am an aunt. I am really an aunt, and I tell stories as in my role as aunt as well. So there are lots of different kinds of stories that that we can tell to children, and there are lots of different times for telling stories to children, and lots of different ways as individual as we are individual. I've been puzzling over how to do this, what is usually a workshop, on Facebook Live. So we're going to try it out, and if you have questions, you can put things in the chat. That's off. I can see it on the side. I may not answer you right away, but I'll do my best. I also like to say at the beginning of every workshop, I have the attention span of an Irish setter, so sometimes my attention goes way off, and I start veering off into some other direction than I started out in. Feel free to yank on the leash. It's nice to see people from New Zealand here. That's great. Um, and I love this idea of being able to put this information out into the world. So there are lots of ways to tell stories, lots of prompts that you can use to find the stories. Usually when I do this as a workshop, I ask if anybody here has a scar. And now we aren't able to have people turn to the person next to you and tell about your scar, but that's one of the little prompts that helps bring up a story. Let me tell you my scar story. And then I want to tell you a little bit about why I do that in the beginning of a workshop. So I happen to have a scar right here on my hand. I got it in 7th grade. And in 7th grade, you know everything. 7th grade, we were doing linoleum block prints. And the teacher, Mr. Manahan, said, hold the block on the table. Do not hold it in your hand. Hold it on the table. And use I don't remember the name of the tool, but use the digging tool and always dig away from yourself. He said, never dig toward yourself. Never do that. 7th grade. I knew everything. I knew that if I held that block in my hand and dug toward myself, I would get a better purchase on it. I'd be able to dig out more of that linoleum. So that's what I did. I dug toward myself and it slipped. And it went right into my hand. But also in 7th grade, even though I knew everything, I was also a good girl. And I didn't want to get in trouble. So I put that down and I went over to the sink and washed my hand and held a paper towel in my hand all day. It hurt. I didn't go to the nurse. If I'd gone to the nurse, maybe I wouldn't have this scar. But if I'd gone to the nurse, I also wouldn't have this story. One of the things about these about scar stories, one reason that I like to start with that is that it really illustrates a great story structure. And if you're telling stories to your children or grandchildren, or if you're a librarian or a teacher, sometimes it's useful if you're making up stories to think about story structure. So this is a structure that I learned from Donald Davis. He's a wonderful storyteller, does lots of personal stories. You might look him up. So you start with the likable character in the setting. Then you get to trouble coming. So I know in English class they might call it rising action, something like that. But I like trouble coming. You get the trouble coming, then you get the trouble. Then you resolve the trouble. And then you have some insight at the end. I happen to have crooked little fingers. My insight is a little bit crooked sometimes. So main character, setting, trouble coming, trouble, trouble resolved, insight at the end. So I just did that in that scar story. I started with 7th grade. And the trouble coming, you saw the trouble coming when I said, he told us to hold that block on the table. He told us to dig away from ourselves. That's the trouble coming, right? Then the trouble. I dug into my hand. Then the trouble resolved. I went to the sink, held that paper towel, didn't go to the nurse. And then the insight at the end, if I hadn't, if I hadn't, if I had gone to the nurse, then I maybe wouldn't have this scar, and then I wouldn't have the story. So that's a nice story structure in case you're telling stories to kids and you're making them up. So personal stories are a great place to start with stories with some kids. Oh, I should really back up. I should talk about a little tiny bit about developmental stuff. Then I'm going to just blast right through that. Um, so I'm going to blast right through the developmental steps, the things that children find engaging in stories at different ages. So usually with children who are 0 to age 2, they love peekaboo, patty cake, nursery rhymes, rhythm, repetition. Rhythm, repetition, and rhyme is a great place. These the stories for young children are oral stories are great for pre-reading skills. You're teaching kids about structure. You're teaching them about rhythm and rhyme and prediction. They start to learn to predict the story. But when they're really little, just peekaboo, patty cake, all of those little chants and rhymes that you maybe knew when you were a child. When they're 2 and 3, and this is very loose and it's not very detailed, but when they're 2 and 3, do finger plays, simple stories, 5 minutes or less. When they are done, they're done. It's fine. If they can last 5 minutes, great. If they can last 30 minutes, great. Just sort of you just have to gauge the children as you go along. Then when they're 4 and 5, they're starting to differentiate from other people. And they understand that other people have feelings. Oh, what a thought. And you can go a little bit longer. They like stories about families, about relationships. They're starting to figure out about relationships, and they can understand that through stories. And then when they're 6 and 7, they're more aware of others. And they're getting the idea of morality. If you tell a story to a 6 or 7-year-old and there's somebody who steals in that story, oh, those children are right there. That's stealing. That's stealing. They will tell you right away. And they're really good at that point at predicting. You might get to the point of trouble coming in a story, and the children will be going, oh, because they know something bad is going to happen. When they're 8, 9, 10, they're figuring out more tricky stories. They're curious about other countries and about the natural world. They understand, at that point, they understand irony and sarcasm. They are less engaged by repetition. So I do a lot of repetition for younger kids, but when they get to be 8, 9, 10, I back it off because they say, we heard that. We know that. So pay attention to the way that they react. And then when they're 11, 12, 13 and up, I always start with some blood, gore. I tell stories that I tell to adults to kids who are 11, 12, 13. Maybe 11, I'm a little iffy if it's too bloody. I don't do sexually explicit stories, not even, well, I don't really do those for adults either. Um, so those are just some developmental things to think about, stages to think about in terms of storytelling and in terms of what is appealing to children. When you're telling stories, of course, it's a kind of dialogue. It's not a recitation, really. I'm not memorizing the stories and telling the children word for word, but it's a conversation. We are going back and forth with the stories. I'm watching the audience, which is what makes it a little tricky on Facebook Live because I cannot see you right now. But I'm watching the audience to see if I should, oh, did they laugh at the point that I thought was funny? Okay, they did. Good. I might beef that up next time. Oh, they didn't get that part. Oh, somebody is looking confused about a word I just used. So I'm going to use a synonym. Somebody is wondering where we are in the story. I'm going to just elaborate a little bit. When I'm working with young children, I also, apart from paying attention to these developmental stages, I am paying attention also to how children learn, right? How we all learn. We learn in different ways. Some people learn mostly through their ears. They're listening and they're paying attention to the words and the sounds and the voices. Some people learn by visual cues. We all learn by actually all of these, I think, but they may favor the visual cues. And so I use my face. I make faces, I make expressions, I portray the story to some extent. I don't act it out, I just tell it, but I'm using my face and my body and my gestures. And then some children and adults learn by moving. That would be me. And so in many stories, for example, today in my daily story time, which I do at 2 p.m. Central Daylight Time, same time as Chicago, I do a daily story time every weekday. And I did a story called The Gunny Wolf. I do this story a lot. I love this one. And in it, there's a little girl who goes into the forest alone. She was singing a little song. She was singing, Kumquakiwa, kumqua. She was picking flowers. Kumquakiwa, 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 kumquakiwa. That movement, that repetitive movement, is helping the children bring that story into themselves, bring it inside. And the song is as well. One of the other things about repetition when you're telling stories to children or adults is when you're listening to a story, it's different from reading. You can't turn the page back if you've forgotten somebody's name or forgotten something. And so repetition helps sort of cement those things into the story, those actions into the story. So thinking about personal stories, the scar story is a great place for older kids. For younger kids, sometimes that might be scary. Might be scary. The idea of blood sometimes is scary for young children. My father was visiting my sister and my nephew. My father had really prominent veins, and he was showing my nephew that there was blood in there. And my nephew he was 4. He got really scared. So you want to be sort of aware of what scares children and what doesn't. Um, I don't like to give children nightmares. I don't mind giving older children nightmares. They like that usually. Um, what There's a book called "Telling Your Own Stories" by Donald Davis. I love that little book. It's got little prompts for personal stories. It's telling your family stories. Um, we have time for this. I'm going to tell you a story that I heard when I used one of those prompts in a workshop many years ago. I was working with some older people, and one of the prompts is tell about the oldest person you met when you were a child. Well, one quite elderly woman said, "Oh, I'll tell you about my great grandmother." She said, She was a bitter old woman. She smoked a lady's pipe, and she had one story that she told. She told it to me many times, and I'll tell it to you. So this was an older woman telling me the story that this oldest woman she remembered meeting when she was a kid had told her. When she was a young wife, it was during the Civil War in the US, and they lived on the border of Kansas and Missouri, where there were border skirmishes. And she had a toddler and an infant, and she heard the border ruffians coming, and she knew she had to get to safety. She had to get out of the house. She picked up the toddler and put him on her back, and she picked up the infant and held the infant and ran. She had to go across a stream to get to the neighbors, to get to safety. And when she did, the water was rushing, and it took the toddler off her back. She instantly put the infant on the bank, got back in the water, got the toddler out, rolled him on the bank to get the water out of his mouth, out of his lungs, and picked up both children and ran to the neighbors to safety. That's the story that this woman told me. So now I had a link to the 1860s from this woman, from the oldest person she remembered. So that's one of the prompts that I really love. There are other prompts in that book, like tell about a time your parents never found out about. I love that one too. Um, so that's a place is personal stories. I loved listening to my parents' personal stories when I was a kid. Some children don't like that. If they don't like it, you might have to find some other kind of story for them. Um, so let's see what next. I've got lots of other things to talk about. So folklore is of course a wonderful place to find stories to tell to children, but also songs and rhymes and things that you remember from when you were a child. Here's one that I learned when I was, well, that my father did when I was little. He would sit me on his knees. He would hold me like this on his knees, and he would say, "Trot, trot to Boston, trot, trot to Lynn. Watch out, Priscilla, you might fall in." And he would open his knees, and I would fall down, and I would laugh and laugh and laugh. Let me do it again so you get it. Trot, trot to Boston, trot, trot to Lynn. Watch out, Priscilla, you might fall in. And of course, you use the child's name. Another one that is fun to do with children when they're really little is Johnny Whoops or Willy Whoops. There are different versions of it. And yes, I do. I was born with crooked little fingers, and so you see them very well on Facebook. It goes like this: Johnny Whoops, Johnny, 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 Johnny Whoops, Johnny Whoops, Johnny, 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 Johnny. Well, and then we could choose somebody else's name. We could choose Willy Whoops, Willy, 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 Willy Whoops, Willy Whoops, Willy, 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 Willy. So that's not a story, but it is a fun little rhyme to do with children, a fun little rhythm exercise to do with children. Those are good for developing brains, really good exercise for developing brains. Um, Another one that my mother used to do when I was upset. She would hold me and she would pat me. You know, she'd hold me against her shoulder and she'd pat me and she'd say this thing that she learned when she was a child. She was a child who was brought up with a nanny. She had a nanny who was French Canadian who would say, "Give him a bone, he wants a bone, he ain't got none. Ruh, ruh. Give him a bone, he wants a bone, he ain't got none. Ruh, ruh." It's a strange little rhyme, but for me it was very comforting. All of these stories and rhymes and chants and songs that you do with children are a way to make a connection. That's the whole point. We're working on making a real connection with children or with whoever's listening to you. Um, Another thing, oh, of course, you could make up stories. People come up to me all the time and they say, "My mom used to tell us stories about the same character. Every night she would make up a new part of the story, of a serial story that went every single night for years. And we loved that character. So you could do that. When I was little, we had I'm the youngest of 7 children, and so there was a lot of stuff going on in our house. We had a young woman who lived with us for 2 years. She was in, I think, 2 or 3 years. She was in college, and so she got room and board for babysitting for us, for the younger kids. And she told me and my sister Deb and my brother Mark, I think, stories about a little girl named Paraphernalia. I thought that was a name. Seemed reasonable. Sounded like a name. Anyway, she made up stories about this little girl named Paraphernalia who rode around on a magic vacuum cleaner. And every night she would tell us a little bit more about Paraphernalia. Well, when I got to be 13 and I started babysitting, I started telling stories to the children I babysat for about a little girl named Paraphernalia. And so that is something to do. You can make up stories. You can make up stories with your children. Um, Let me give you some ideas about that. Actually, let me tell you a story. This is a story that I told when I was 13, 14, 15, 16 to a family. I told this story many times to the same family, and I used the names of the children in the family. I hope they'll watch this at some point. They're all adults now, but there were 3 kids: Peter, Angela, and Kristen, and they went out one day and decided to dig a hole. This was, of course, in the time of free-range children. They went out to dig a hole, and they took their diggers, and they dug, and they dug, and they dug, and they dug, and they dug. They dug all day long. They dug. They didn't go home for lunch. They didn't go home to go to the bathroom. They didn't go home for a snack. They just dug this hole, and they dug, and they dug, and they dug. And then when they were finished digging, they realized they were in the bottom of the hole. It was very deep, and they couldn't get out. And then an amazing thing happened. That they must have hit a peanut butter spring. Oh yeah, oh yeah. They hit a peanut butter spring, and that hole began to fill up with peanut butter. There was peanut butter between their toes. There was peanut butter behind their knees. There was peanut butter under their arms. There was peanut butter in their elbows. There was peanut butter in their mouths because they were eating it. They were very hungry. But when they'd eaten enough peanut butter, they realized they still couldn't get out. They tried to make a pile of the peanut butter so they could climb out, but it didn't really work. It just flowed down. They did the only thing they could do. They called their dog. The dog's name was Gorgonzola. So all 3 of them all at once called out, "Gorgonzola!" Gorgonzola came running. He was a big black dog. He was a smart dog. He looked down in that hole. He saw those kids, Peter, Angela, Kristen, and he barked once, and he barked twice, and he barked 3 times, and he ran away. They didn't know what to do. Kristen began to cry. She was the youngest one. And then Gorgonzola came back, and he barked again. He had a rope ladder. He threw one end down into the hole. Kristen climbed up first because she was the lightest one. And then she helped hold the ladder. And Angela climbed up. And then Peter climbed up. And then they all went home, and they had long, hot baths. And they each had, for supper, they each had a great big bowl of peanut butter. But when they went back the next day to that place where they dug the hole, it was gone. It was all filled in and graded over. But every time they passed that spot, there was a faint smell of peanut butter. And that's the peanut butter story. So I just made that up when I was 13, and I told that story over and over. They would ask for it. And one of the reasons they'd ask for it is I used their names. When I'm making up a story with a child, here's a pattern that I like to use. Once upon a time, there was a girl named Harriet. She was the queen of everything and everyone. One day, so I start out with the name of the child. One day she was in her bath. She was having a great bubble bath. And all of a sudden, a huge bubble grew up out of the tub, and Harriet got inside it. And that bubble floated up and went out the window and floated up into the sky. And it floated all the way to space. There was Harriet in the bubble. So that's the beginning of a story that I might make up with a child. But I would use the child's name. Um, so that's one way. Another way is sometimes you need a prompt, right? Sometimes you don't have any ideas. You're at the end of that bed and the children are wide awake and you are not. Kind of snoozy. Yeah, I get that. I get that. Even as a kid babysitting, I would get that. I would have that feeling. Well, you could play Magic Box. So I'm going to show you my Magic Box. Let me just organize it a little bit more. With Magic Box, you can do a progressive story. So one person starts by choosing something from the Magic Box. I'm going to just show you. It's a little iffy. It's much better in person, but I'll show you my Magic Box. There are lots of different things in that box. So the first person might choose that elephant and say, once upon a time, there was an elephant who was stomping down the road, angry, 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 because her mother had told her to clean up her room. And then, if we were playing Magic Box, I would pass it to the next person who would choose something else. And the elephant ran into a butterfly. The butterfly was flitting here and flitting there. And the elephant said, why are you just flitting around like that? And then that person would pass the box along. And so I usually begin and end Magic Box so that you can wrap it up. Otherwise, this can go on forever. I do have a rule with Magic Box, especially when working with, say, fourth grade boys who like to blow everything up. The story must go on. Even if everything is blown up, the story must go on. So there's one little speck of dust still there. The next person has to take that story and keep on going. But then I like to end it up. When you're telling stories, you're taking your listeners out on a journey, and you need to bring them back safely home, right? So I like to bring them back to happily ever after. So that's one way to play Magic Box. There's another way. I play Magic Box full and Magic Box empty. When I play Magic Box empty, I love this box because it looks like a book. I will open it and say, oh my gosh, can you believe it? There are a couple of kittens in here, and they are playing chess. And then I pass that box to the next person to take over. I did that once with some second graders, huge class of second graders. And most of the kids followed my pattern, and that often happens. They just follow your pattern, and that's great. But one kid looked at it and she said, there's a big old tooth in here. I said, there's a tooth? Whose is it? Yours. I said, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize I lost a tooth. So that brings me to another point. This is the other point is that this is a kind of improvisation, isn't it? You're just making up this story on the spot. In improv, the rule is say yes. Say yes and. So, um, so I said yes, and I didn't even know I'd lost a tooth. So go with whatever it is. I do have an exception when I work with kids. I have two things. If I'm working in a school, it has to be school appropriate, and also I have my other rule is it can't be mean, it can't be unkind about anybody in the room or anybody can't be unkind. Don't be mean. So that is Magic Box. So another way to play that is also when I was a kid, we played a game called Mailbag, which is essentially the same game as Magic Box, but we didn't have any trinkets to look at. Oh yes, we do have those rules for college students as well on that game. Um, but I don't know why we called this game Mailbag. But one person would start the story, and when they'd done 2 or 3 sentences, they would say mailbag, and that was the key word. So the next person would take over. You can choose any word you want, but it's a great thing to do in the car. It's a great thing to do when you're in the doctor's waiting room. There are all kinds of good places to do that kind of pass along story. Um, anytime you're waiting, anytime you're waiting. Um, let's see. Oh, I don't know if any of you have the game Rory's Story Cubes. Rory's Story Cubes. It is it's little dice with uh, different fairy tale things on them, and that's a great way to play stories with kids and to make up stories with kids. Let's see. What else did I want to tell you about? Okay. Um, Magic Box, we've got that. Another thing, I often also work with kids on writing. So I'm just going to give you one more idea, which you could do with younger kids. I have collected over the years some photographs of people I don't know. I got them I get them from secondhand stores. I get them from tag sales, garage sales. So, for example, there's a picture of someone I don't know. I might make up a story about that. When I write with kids, I pass them out and we choose a picture. I saw a really great one that I wanted to show you. Oh, there's one. Who is this child? We start to make up stories. Um, sometimes they're really gruesome. They can be. It might be, um, there might be a creepy person in one of these stories, in these pictures. Who are these people? What happened to them? In those stories, um, the word, the phrase to keep in mind is, what if? What if? What if something happened? Uh, what if something happened to this young man? What if something what if something great happened, or what if something horrible happened? Of course, in stories you always have some kind of conflict, right? You Another story structure I like to think about is somebody wanted something, but so I'll do it again just so you get it. Somebody wanted, but so. So somebody wanted this, but this happened, so this happened. And often in stories that repeats over and over. Um, so don't forget also the stories that you grew up with, the old standard stories, right? Three Little Pigs, Little Red Riding Hood. If you forget how they go, or if you want a larger store of them, I love the library. The number you want to keep in mind is, in the US anyway, in the Dewey Decimal System, is 398.2. 398.2 is where folktales and fairy tales live. And you can find folktales and fairy tales everywhere in the U.S. in public libraries, both in the children's department and in the adult department. And it's a great way to find stories from other countries, find stories from other cultures, introduce the children to other cultures. Think about, you know, uh, maybe some country your children have never heard of. Maybe things are different there. You can do a little bit of, not too much, but a little. Well, you can do a lot if you want, but do some research and find something out about that culture. So you're not just taking the story, but you're offering it, offering it to your children to think about other people in the world. Um, let's see. I want to leave some time at the end of this for questions because, of course, you probably have questions and suggestions and ideas. Um, let me tell you. Oh, of course. So, of course, bedtime is a great time for stories. In the car, the doctor's waiting room, as I said, but campfires. Remember those funny, scary stories that you grew up with? A lot of kids know those. Um, Let me tell you one that a kid told me. Let me drink a little bit of water. And I do tell this one at campfires. I think this kid may have found it on the site called Creepy Pasta. Yes, I love stories from other countries. Yes, as a way to learn about cultures, it's fantastic. So Creepy Pasta. This is a weird website, and kids mostly post stories on it. And I think the kid who told me this one had found it there. There was a guy who went out camping, and from his campsite, he went hiking. And he hiked for a long, long way, and he got lost. He was lost in the woods, and he knew he wouldn't be able to get back to his campsite. It was too far. So he wandered, and he found an old house, a big, old house. And in this house, well, the sun was starting to go down. He went up, he thought he had to stay inside. It was dangerous outside. He went inside, and there was a huge dining room with portraits on the walls. Oh, that was too creepy. He didn't want to sleep down there. So he found his way upstairs. It was getting really dark, but he found a bed, dusty old bed, and he slept on that dusty old bed. In the morning, he went downstairs, and that dining room, which he thought had portraits lining the walls, it didn't have portraits. It had windows. So that's the story. So creepy stories that you maybe remember, or maybe even you just go and find them on creepypasta or on scouting sites. If you go looking for scout stories and songs, you will find a wealth of fun things to do with your kids. Um, I love sort of poking around and finding old songs that I had forgotten about. Um, Oh yes, the story of Slender Man that showed up on creepypasta has become an urban legend, and now it's a horror movie. Yeah. So let me bring you back down to little tiny children, or not little tiny, but younger children. A story that I like to do. I know that Caleb has seen me do this one, um, and this works as with I do it really up to about age 5 or 6. It's a story called Mr. Wiggle and Mr. Waggle. If you're a librarian, this is a really useful story for preschool story time. May I see your thumbs, please? Okay, good. This is Mr. Wiggle. This is Mr. Waggle. We're going to put them inside their houses. One day, Mr. Wiggle woke up. He decided to visit his best friend, Mr. Waggle. He opened the door to his house. Pop! He went outside. Pop! He shut the door. Pop! And he went down the hill and up the hill, down the hill and up the hill, down the hill and up the hill, till he got to Mr. Waggle's house. Knock, 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 knock. Mr. Waggle was asleep. Mr. Wiggle rang the doorbell. Bing bong, bing bong, bing bong. Or, depending on where you live in the world, bzz, bzz, bzz. Mr. Waggle was still asleep. Mr. Wiggle went home. He went down the hill and up the hill, down the hill and up the hill, down the hill and up the hill, till he got to his own house. He opened the door, pop. He went inside, pop. He shut the door, pop, and he went to sleep. The next day, Mr. Waggle woke up. He decided to visit his best friend, Mr. Wiggle. He opened the door to his house, pop. He went outside, pop. He shut the door, pop, and he went down the hill and up the hill, down the hill and up the hill, down the hill and up the hill, till he got to Mr. Wiggle's house. Knock, 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 knock. Mr. Wiggle was asleep. Mr. Waggle rang the doorbell. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, or bzz, bzz, bzz. Mr. Wiggle was still asleep. Mr. Waggle went all the way home. He went down the hill and up the hill, down the hill and up the hill, down the hill and up the hill, till he got to his own house. He opened the door, pop. He went inside, pop. He shut the door, pop, and he went to sleep. The next day, they both woke up. They decided to visit each other. They opened the doors to their houses, pop. They went outside, pop. They shut the doors, pop, and they went down the hill and up the hill, down the hill and up the hill. They met right in the middle at the park. Hi, Mr. Waggle. How are you, Mr. Wiggle? I'm fine. Let's have a party. Let's have a picnic. Let's have fun. And so they had a picnic. Do you know what they had to eat? If you want to put it in the chat, what did they have to eat? They had sandwiches. What else did they have? They had ice cream. They had bananas. They had macaroons. And they had worms. And they went on the swings after all the worms. Oh, they went wee, wee. Oh, they stopped and had some pickles. They went on the swings. Wee, 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 wee. They went down the slide. Whoop, 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 whoop. They went down the curly slide. Woo, woo. Of course, they had some watermelon. They went on the seesaw. Bing. They stopped. They had some plums. And they danced. That was fun. Let's do it again sometime. Okay, bye-bye, 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 bye-bye. They went down the hill and up the hill, down the hill and up the hill, till they got to their own houses. They opened the doors, pop. They went inside, pop. They shut the doors, pop. And they went to sleep. And that's the story of Mr. Wiggle and Mr. Waggle. A couple of things I want to point out about that story. One thing that I love about it is that we crossed the midline of the body. Crossing the midline, especially for children who are under 5 years old, it's a little piece of brain development. So if you can bring your one hand to the other side of your body, it's really good. We don't, now when kids are looking at screens and they're holding a tablet like this, or they're doing this, they're not crossing that. This is really good. Really good. And yes, and I do repetition. I do a lot of repetition, and I do 3 times. 3s are helpful for those of us from Western cultures. In many Native American cultures, 4 is the repetitive pattern. But in our U.S. and European cultures, 3 is the pattern that our brains sort of go to. One thing I wanted to say, I'm glad your 5-year-old likes this. One thing that I wanted to say too is if you're looking for campfire stories, this is just a little tiny shameless plug. I have a YouTube channel, and on it there are several campfire stories. I also have a website with lots of information, lots and lots and lots of information. So let's see, what else did I want to say about that? So when I'm doing Mr. Wiggle and Mr. Waggle, I ask the listeners for suggestions. What did they have to eat? And I accept pretty much everything. I accept everything. Worms, fine, no problem. I think they go down a little slippery, but just saying yes. Oh, I'm glad when that you like the ghost with the one black eye. That is the story that I am best known for, the ghost with the one black eye, and it's a very fun story to tell. Very fun for kids to listen to. I have a million little ideas pinging around in my brain right now. One is to say that the reason that the ghost with the one black eye is so compelling, I think, took me a long time to figure this out. If you don't know the story, it's about a baby who wants her apple juice. Everybody goes downstairs. There's to the basement. They're all scared by the ghost, but then the baby goes down and gets her juice. She says, "You'll be the ghost with the two black eyes if you don't let me get my apple juice." Oh, that was startling. um, and the reason that that is so compelling for children is that I think the one who is usually considered to be the least powerful is the most powerful in that story. Children gain a vicarious sense of power. And so you might think about what your stories are telling to children. What are they learning from them? What are they thinking about? You can ask them that too. I have found that children, the more you tell them stories, the better they are at listening, the better they are at understanding story structure. That's a pre-writing skill, really wonderful. Um, and so, what I've noticed, I know that Caleb knows this. Oh, oh, good. Helen is taking notes. So I've been doing a daily story time on Zoom every day except last week since March 16th. I did it partly to teach myself how to use Zoom, partly to give something to the community, and partly to anchor my day. And I'm still doing it, and I'll do it through August. And what I have learned is that the kids who come every day, and there are many kids who come every day, their listening skills have gotten much more sophisticated. I have been telling them stories that I normally tell to older kids and even adults. There's, I know Helen has heard the story of the Never Born Maiden. It's a long Bulgarian wonder tale, but the kids ask for it. They ask for it, and so kids will reach up if you tell them stories that you think are maybe above their comprehension level. They really reach up. Oh yes, and Caleb says their kids like the stories where kids are a little bad but get away with it. I love The Great Sharp Scissors. That's a story by Philippa Pierce, Pearce. She's not a well-known author in the U.S. She's died, but she was English, and she's a wonderful author. I wrote for permission to tell her stories. Um, Back when I first started telling stories, and she gave me blanket permission to tell her stories. We have about 12 minutes. Let me see if there's anything else that I wanted to throw at you. I know I've given you a whole bunch of stuff to think about. Do you have questions at this point, or comments? I'm watching the chat box. While I'm watching that, I'll just bring out a friend of mine. Yeah. I didn't get to come to this. No, you didn't get to come to this. Isn't that fair? No, this is not a program about puppets. Yeah, but I'm the baby. I know you're the baby. So, also on my YouTube channel, you'll find a 2-minute lesson on how to use puppets. Yeah. Watch out for the baby. Yeah, watch out for the baby. Oh, I ain't gonna paint no more. I don't know that. I don't know that. I am going to look for that. I love stories by Robert Munch. And so, yes, a question about, okay, let's see. So I've got a million things here. I'm going to write down, ain't going to paint no more. Um, so kids with ants in their pants. When I was 5, I learned ants in your pants make your belly button dance. I did tell that to the kids at story time the other day. I love that one. I make sure to do I do short stories, and I mix them in with puppets, and I mix them in with songs in between, and I make sure there's something where they can move, something where maybe they're clapping, or maybe they're patting their knees, or they're doing something. So, and also don't know that kids may be listening. They may not look like they're listening, but they are listening. I don't insist that kids sit still. Children will act their ages. I just, I say that to the parents. Just, it's okay if everybody acts their ages. Uh, Angela Wynn, the storytelling prompts, Telling Your Own Stories by Donald Davis. It's a little tiny book. It's just this big, and the prompts are take up one page. Telling Your Own Stories by Donald Davis. How much do I practice the technique of storytelling? Well, I've been doing it so long now. I've been doing it for 32 years. I don't really have a daily routine except that I'm doing story times every day now. Um, but when I first started, I would practice. I'd practice in the mirror. I'd see what I looked like, see what my facial expressions were. And when I'm learning a new story, I tell it to myself. I walk around my house. I can walk in a circle in my house, and I walk the story. And I think about the characters, and I try to think about the backstory, try to understand what the story's about for me. It may not be what it's about for everybody. I love that question, Helen. What's my favorite story to tell? The rule is only tell stories you love, which means I love every story. At the moment that I'm telling it, that's my favorite. So when I'm telling The Ghost of the One Black Eye, that's my favorite. But when I'm telling The Neverborn Maiden, that's my favorite. But the favorite of listeners is The Ghost of the One Black Eye. Another book that's useful is The Storyteller's Startup Book by Margaret Reed MacDonald. Storyteller's Startup Book, Margaret Reed MacDonald. That's a wonderful book. Um, Year 7 or 8. Well, how old are year 7 or 8? In different countries, the years are different. Um, is that like 12, 14-year-old, 12, 13, 14? I like to start with kids like that. I might start with a jump tale. A jump tale is a story that has something that is startling in the middle and it makes everybody jump. I might do the old English folktale Mr. Fox, which is really gruesome. I might do um, uh, let's see, Mary Culhane and the Dead Man. Those are fairly bloody stories, um, if that's the right age. Um, yes. Oh, Moira's Birthday is a great Robert Munch story to tell for younger kids. Okay, 10 to 12. 10 to 12, I would not do too bloody, but I would start to do something. I would do something a little bit scary. Philippa Pierce has a book called Who's Afraid? And the title story is really good for that age, and it is a jump tale. Now I feel bad for telling you it's a jump tale because when I give advice on telling jump tales, I say don't say it's a jump tale before you tell it. The problem too is that Philippa Pierce is not well known. Her books may be out of print, but look for stories that are possibly a little tricky, a little complicated, um, but have something um, maybe creepy. I like creepy stories. There's another author that I like, Judith Gorog, Gorog. She has reimagined many folk tales, many creepy folk tales, and written them in contemporary language and contemporary times. So she has a book, she has a story called Smelly Sneakers. That's a really creepy one I would tell to 10 to 12-year-olds. Smelly Sneakers by Judith Gorog. It might be in the book a taste for quiet and other disquieting tales. It might be in a messy, messy room, or it might be in No Swimming in Dark Pond. Those are great books. Those also might be out of print. I don't know, but maybe you can get them used. But those are really good for those 10 to 12-year-old listeners. Let's see. Yes, Storyteller Startup Book is great. And then, Margaret Reed MacDonald also has The Parent's Guide to Storytelling. That's perfect for this. That's perfect for this, for this particular workshop-ish talk. Let's see. Yes, I love those schoolyard songs. Caleb knows that sometimes we do what I call dirty songs. I've got 3 dirty songs. I'll just do them with you now if you want. Let's do Black Socks. These are camp songs that either I learned as an adult, but I knew they were from scout camps, or I learned them as kids. Black socks, they never get dirty. The longer they wear them, the longer I wear them, the better they get. Sometimes I think I should launder them. Something keeps telling me don't wash them yet, not yet, not yet. I'll do it again. Black socks, they never get dirty. The longer you wear them, the better they get. Sometimes I think I should launder them. Something keeps telling me don't wash them yet, not yet, not yet. So Black Socks. Then we do Garbage Bill, which I learned from my friend Dorotha. Quick thing about Dorotha. She took up storytelling when she was 80 years old. She wanted to prove to her family she didn't have Alzheimer's. She told stories until about 6 months before she died. I think she died at 92. And she told stories at Head Starts, preschools. She never took money for it. She learned new stories every week. She's a little bit of an example. So she taught me this one. Garbage Bill, lived on top of Garbage Hill. Never took a bath and he never will. Pee-you, Garbage Bill. I'll do it again. Garbage Bill, lived on top of Garbage Hill. Never took a bath and he never will. Pee-you, Garbage Bill. So, yes, also, yes, There's a Hole in the Bucket is a great one. One more song, I'll just do this last one. It's really short. Ain't gonna rain no more, no more. Ain't gonna rain no more. How in the heck will I wash my neck if it ain't gonna rain no more? So that's one of the 3 dirty songs that we do in my story time. I did want to mention also, I have a Patreon account, and I offer a subscription to bedtime stories. So if you wanted to subscribe to my bedtime stories, you could go to Patreon. That's Patreon. It's like patron, but with an E in it. And look up Priscilla Howe. And you can subscribe for $5, $10, $15 a month. You get the same thing no matter how much you subscribe for. And you get a new story every week, and you get the whole archive of all the stories. They're audio only. I don't want kids watching screens when they're getting ready to go to bed. So it's just a way to sort of supplement your storytelling. I think it's great that you could tell stories to kids as they're going to bed. I think we might be. Any more questions? Anything else? I'm peering at the chat box. I really appreciate the chat. It really helps me feel like I'm not just sitting here in my my studio, which is otherwise known as the dining room. Yes, I do one-on-one coaching. So contact me, Priscilla at priscillahowe.com. And I will probably be offering a puppet workshop for adults in August. I've got it in my brain. I have to get it out of my brain and onto the calendar. I'm glad, Collier. But feel free to contact me. I am a librarian to my core, which means that I like to give people information. I really like to. So feel free to email me, follow me on Facebook, or friend me on Facebook, because I have both my personal page and my professional page and my Puppet Trixies page also. So thank you so much, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it.
Hi, just before we close out, I'd like to say, one, thank you for coming, Priscilla. And two, if you liked this, she will be back August 5th for the Trickster Show, and also on August 7th for Happy Ever After, telling folk tales. If you guys want a reminder, I created Facebook events for both of these, so feel free to go to there. We also have some cool stuff coming up next week. We have our guided activities coming out on Monday. We have 2 story times coming out on Tuesday. And we have a guest presenter coming on Wednesday. It's Didgeridoo Down Under. So I hope you guys enjoyed and see you next time.
Thanks so